When people talk about retro classics, you have your standard mentions. Mario 3, Mario World, Super Metroid, Castlevania 3, games standing the test of time and still being remembered fondly decades after they come out. Vice Project Doom is a game that should have been remembered just as fondly. It's mostly a side-scrolling platformer akin to Ninja Gaiden, though I say mainly, as it has other gameplay styles to go along with it. If you're a fan of retro games in general, I think you can find a lot to enjoy here if you can push through a decent challenge. And the story won't be disappointing either if you turn your brain off for most of it. Besides a few moments of unrefined design, it's smooth to play over 30 years later, as there's frankly not much that was done incorrectly. Accompanied by its usually fantastic graphical presentation, it actually has infinite continues, and the game won't ask you to bash your head against the wall most of the time for its obstacles either. I did just say multiple gameplay styles though, so what do I mean? Well, one of the many things that stand out with this game is the gameplay variety they've put in. You have 3 distinct gameplay styles to play, not just one. And the 2 supplemental styles that break things up aren't done in a sloppy manner either. There's the main running and gunning and slashing of enemies, but also car missions as you race down long and dangerous roads, and the shooting gallery stages of all things. While the NES had plenty of platformers, RPGs, puzzle games, and other kinds of genres in its library, shooting gallery style games were a pretty big rarity around this time. There's a reason both of these are displayed on the back of the box after all.
The Supercharged Street Machine!
Levels have you in a top-down view while you move around, avoiding things and hopefully not bumping into walls, and they don't ever stretch out their welcome. They not only fit in for this game's story and tone, but you also have 3 different speeds you can pick from for added control, with no weird handling to adjust to either. It's just straight and to the point, moving and shooting, and it really helps add spectacle compared to what most of the regular platforming can do. The 2 shooting gallery levels also don't last for too long, and they're just as easy to understand quickly. There's not much to say here either, but it's definitely awesome they put in such a thing. 3D perspectives on such limited hardware were not only a rarity, but were just as rarely done justice. They also really should have been elaborated on just a little more. Both of these gameplay styles serve as a breakup for the main game, and they do it well, but the shooting gallery parts feel too short. Both of these styles get only 2 levels to their gameplay each. I was actually worried about repeating footage for this section of the video, because the shooting gallery levels each last a bit over 40 seconds. Just a bit over a single minute is spent with this kind of gameplay in total. It's a similar case for the top-down car levels, but at least both of those have a boss at the end. Makes me wonder why these simply didn't have any. Maybe they were already running out of cartridge space, or there were developer limitations. Who knows? Meanwhile, how your character controls in this game is mostly without issue. You're unable to input anything while you use a weapon, and you can't tweak your jump height either. Your jump height is always the same. You can actually crouch while walking, something I don't know of any other NES games letting you do, besides Wizards and Warriors 2 for the NES, and I guess Metroid 1 if you can count it. And it can do wonders with giving you control as you dodge enemy fire, like with these examples here. The weapon quick switching is also really cool, and it being mapped to select was also a brilliant idea. Way too many NES games never use that button for anything meaningful. The only other occasional gripe I have is that when you jump on a ladder, your character automatically clinks to it, so you can't jump down ladders unlike so many other games. You also clink to them automatically, but I could take it or leave it. As for the weapons themselves, they almost managed to make the game shine in this department. The beam sword feels appropriately big because almost the whole sprite is a hitbox, so you can actually hit enemies behind you with the tip of it, and how fast you can use it is compensated by the melee range. Your grenades, meanwhile, reach really far with a huge explosion radius, at the cost of low ammo, and them having some cooldown. I just don't get why the gun is so terrible though. They made it pretty awful. The bullets are fairly small compared to the other 2 weapons. Compare the massive radius the grenade has to a single blip on screen, or how this section is vastly different between using the gun and the grenades. The range for your gun is about a fourth of the screen, and it doesn't even go through walls, something it could have had over the grenade. There's a decent amount of moments I found that it didn't work when it should have. Like, just look at this. Look at how many times I tried shooting an enemy and it just disappears right in front of their noses. I have so much footage of it. There was not enough testing on it as there should have been. I don't think giving it full screen reach would have made it overpowered or anything, because the projectile is already so small. The only time I found it actively useful was for one boss fight. Its relatively quick fire rate and longer reach than the beam sword helped me keep a good distance, when the grenades were slower and the beam sword just wasn't going to work. And I guess this specific part of a level design because the grenades go in an arc. That's it. Thankfully it's perfectly usable in the gallery shooting sections, for as much as that's worth I guess. It might seem excessive to complain this much about a weapon in a game from 1991, but I feel it's pretty fair to give it so much flack with how easy it should have been to tweak it to make it way better. If this was a game like Mega Man or Legend of Zelda, where there's so many options you'll have at once, and the balance is a lot harder to get right as a result of your wealth in options, then I wouldn't be so harsh. But you only have these 3 options for the whole game, and to have one be so weak compared to the other 2 is pretty weird. And even though I like weapon ammo resupplying indefinitely when you run out, 3 seconds for ammo is really short. You're gonna be constantly getting coins from enemies, which once you get 100 just gives you an extra life, and that ends up taking a few minutes. What if they were used for ammo instead? And both of your weapons used from the same ammo pool, but you only had a resupply rate of about 5 seconds or so? You would give coins a worthwhile purpose, and have players be more mindful of spending ammo at the same time. So what about how well the levels are put together? The levels in this game feel pretty considerate in their design all in all. There's a healthy variety of enemies, gimmicks, and hazards to deal with, even if they didn't have the level design down to an exact science like Mario. There's a few particular snags like in the very first stage when you're supposed to go down this ladder, but most people would think to go right. Or a few moments later on that just bombard you with enemies, and you're kind of just forced to bomb rush through, spamming the beam sword or relying on invincibility frames just to get a chance to breathe. Some of the worst I got was with the final stage with these jumps here. I'm still not completely sure how to do it damageless either. Moments like these show enemy placement not being considered well, but it surprisingly works out okay. And given the little damage most enemies do to you, most if not every enemy deals only 1 damage. There's also usually health pickups the level design will drop for you soon enough, and also right before most boss fights. A few enemy types also show behavior overlap with others, but that's fairly minor. Something else to mention is how the camera scrolling could have been better. When you move to the right, it scrolls when you're in the center of the screen, but while you move left, you have to be closer to the left side of the screen before it starts scrolling, and a few sucker punch moments arise as a result. As for moments of brilliance, here's a few that actually had me smirking. I'm not too sure how deliberate this one room is, but I felt really good doing a grenade toss to this enemy here. Threading the needle felt really sublime. There's these onion ring throwing fellows that made me consider how I was gonna go forward for a bit, because their projectiles take knockback, but you can't delete them, which really helped add some depth to facing them. And another small amusing moment I had was with this enemy here. I was about to kill it and it actually responded to me crouching in front of it. It really made me do a double take. A lot of the enemies in this game are designed to actively try to kill you. They don't just exist in levels to be the equivalent of traffic cones or something. Like with 90% of bosses from around this era of video games, most of these don't stand out that much. Don't get me wrong, they're quality encounters, but 95% of NES boss fights don't compare to the best of the 16-bit era, obviously. They're definitely worth their own section in this video though. They all pose their own unique challenges, and at least have different places you can stand on and are more different from one another. The room layouts change quite a bit, some having ladders, some having different platforms, etc. I guess here's a few mentions to the ones that needed some tweaking. This green guy here has a really bad room. The footage of me killing him in about 6 seconds is self-explanatory. Look at how much health that was added to. It's a similar case for this other one. He's not piss easy, but he can be bomb rushed pretty easily too. The third boss you face was really hard for me to get the hang of the first few times, and it's even worse with how early on he is. He's simple once you figure him out, but he's still really fast. He can deal damage just as quick, and his fire attack is a bit of a tight squeeze. I almost want to celebrate at the clone fight. It's that good. It really should have swapped places with this goofy skeleton man you fight last instead. He lands in 3 designated spots, while you need to have careful movement so he doesn't kill you so quickly. He shoots his gun if you're further away, actually repositions himself if you're full screen. He uses his beam sword if you're in melee range, so you can't just abuse your own on him. And if you think to anticipate his gun and crouch before he starts firing, he actually shoots while crouching to get you that way too. He really feels like someone you're fighting as opposed to a random machine with designated moves, like with some of the previous fights. One of the very few fights on the NES I can give an avid thumbs up to. He's really cool. As for the story and context of why you're doing all this, hard to say. The story is by far the game's worst aspect, and it's a bit upsetting given how much effort was put into the cutscenes. It took me a few times to go over the story to even understand what was going on. Your presumably lifelong friend dies in front of you, I think. You kill Christy at some point, a character with a pencil shaving more of emotional investment compared to Reese. You turn out to be a clone, and your purpose was to help keep some evil organization running. Also, I think you murder a furry in the first mission of the game. No joke, look at his hand. This is more or less how I tend to remember the story of this game, and it's not even me trying to dunk on it necessarily. It's not completely by the numbers, I suppose. The damsel of this game actually dies here. Go figure. Who was Reese to our main character? We get told to chase a guy down with a car at the start of the game, so do we work for anyone? What's the stuff in our trunk? These are questions to ask, and with no answers to them. Unless you bothered reading the manual. I kind of lied. This game has a somewhat good story, for what it is. The manual also gives you some important context the Japanese version doesn't have. Info of the characters you encounter such as Christy, Sophia, Reese, etc. And it tells you about the alien survivors who are behind the green gel that's used as a multi-purpose drug. And more surprisingly, it has cool flavor text on some of the bosses, fleshing them out of all things. The Japanese version was toned down when it came overseas like so many other games unfortunately were back then. And whoever localized this game made no attempt to make the dialogue, while it doesn't have any bad English, remotely engaging. It's definitely a product of its time. Funnily enough, they took out the mention of drugs for this game in the cutscenes, but it's actually here on the box. Amazing. It suffers the fate a game like Mega Man X1 does, where a good amount of the story is put in the manual without anything in the game to hint at it at the bare minimum. Although I'm sure at the time it was completely expected for a bunch of players to have the manual with them, and they would know the half of the missing story as a result. But hey, hindsight's 2020. At least the cutscenes look great. A lot of dithering, moving characters, and pretty detailed sprite work helps this game really stand out with the story presentation, and most of the levels have at least one cutscene after them. Christy and Sophia should have also been the same character. Christy's death barely has any impact given she, like with Reese, simply has no emotional investment for us. Speaking of, I think most people would agree that this game looks absolutely great for an NES game, only rivaled by titles like Little Samson or Mega Man 6. Even though some of the color palette choices don't always work the best, for some of the stage layouts and enemies, like how these rats are pink and blue, or this other stage with an excessive use of bronze everywhere, they still manage to generally have a really good amount of detail all around. There's a few select examples like the flames in this cutscene, or the fan spinning in this stage, or the water flowing in the sewer level that all look as good as they do in spite their NES limitations. These are also far from the only good examples. There's plenty to choose from. Like the final stage with the portraits in the background, the curtains, the pillars, the chandeliers, the carpet, the sets of armor, and the pipes displaying the artist really flexing their craft. The icing on the cake being the added shadows everything has here. It makes the stage truly filled with things an evil rich bastard would probably have, besides the excessive use of pipes in the ceiling, I guess. Hell, have a look at one of the best looking NES screens of all time. With the use of parallax scrolling of all things on the goddamn NES to make this a truly stunning looking level. When I first got to this point in the game, I was blown away, and I had my eyes glued to the screen for a solid minute. It's quite the remarkable work of art. Anime and character sprites are done really well too. I wouldn't say any of them are that remarkable to me as character designs, but the very precise use of color clearly shows what each thing is. Like the regular animals you'd see in the wild, to the weird aliens, to the numerous kinds of henchmen that all go after you. They made sure to make the most out of a 3-color palette and sprite sizes, barring an occasional hiccup or two. The other half of the presentation, being the music, I would say is at least above average. It feels appropriate enough for what's going on, from high-speed chases to deep dank sewers, to being on top of a speeding train. The only theme I found myself humming to outside of the game was the train stage theme, but I couldn't tell you why. A good highlight I think would be the final stage music. It's really got this sense of, well, finality to it. The game trying to get you to push forward to finally go after the bastard who's behind making Hart kill 2 of his loved ones. The rage having built up higher and higher in him as he finally goes for his sweet revenge. It's good stuff. The credits theme does an even better job, coming off as really melancholy after everything is said and done, with the uncertain future to follow. What has Hart got to do now? Will he have to later rise to the occasion and put an end to the cloning? We will never know. Something somewhat noteworthy about the soundtrack is how many different themes there are for cutscenes and boss fights. So many other games of this era had way less for each. There's 3 boss themes, and a whopping 6 tracks for the different cutscenes. As stated in the start of this video, this is one of the best games in the NES library. And while it's not too long, being about an hour or so of runtime once you learn it, it's fairly generous in its progression, another luxury most NES games don't have. If Moby Games is to be believed as a reliable source, a whole team of only 8 people made this game. I'm so glad it finally got a re-release in the Nintendo Switch Online service. Although people have emulated the game, of course. Not that I'm saying to do that. That would be illegal. It desperately needs re-releases elsewhere though. It'll probably still be underappreciated for years to come. But I'm more than happy that I came across it. This game manages to work really well despite the hardware it was made for, and it's a shame it never got a sequel. Hopefully this video did this game justice and gets more people to look into it, because it's been so lost to time. And the rights holders have done sweet FA to get people to know about it as it is.